This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze, your journey through life. And as of this week, I have two shows called Avoid the Maze. One is Avoid the Maze, your journey through life, which is what we're on today. And the other one is Avoid the Maze, you are special. And actually, Michael, you fall in both categories. And I say that because after I read your bio, it's like, you've been through a lot in your life. And most people think that they're the only ones who maybe run into obstacles on a regular basis. But if you take those obstacles and you make them into challenges and challenges into tasks to meet whatever that thing is that you want to get to, we can live a much richer life. And it sounds like you've done that. So tell my guests a little bit about yourself and how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. So I'm a physician trained as a cardiologist. I did my internal medicine training at Boston Medical Center and then my cardiology training at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I've been in practice since 1985 and a very busy life and two sons and my wife. I've been married for 42 years. And life was just kind of going along as it had been for years. And then in December of 2013, I developed a cold. Not a very unusual thing to happen in the fall or the winter of any year, but it didn't get better. And then I went to see my physician. I had at the time a simple pneumonia. I put on some antibiotics, but I didn't respond. I kept getting worse. And in December 31st, I woke up during the night really struggling to breathe. My wife had already been awakened by my labored breathing, and she's a nurse, critical care nurse, and we both knew I was in trouble. And so we called 911, and I was brought to the emergency room of the hospital, social hospital where I worked for decades. The By the time I got there, I was really struggling, and my blood oxygen level was very low. They did a repeat chest X-ray, and the chest X-ray had now shown both my lungs were completely involved, and the diagnosis was acute respiratory distress syndrome, and I needed to be placed on life support. And that was a pretty traumatic time. And unfortunately, I failed to respond, and they told my wife that I was dying, and that I needed to be sent into the Brigham and Women's Hospital to be placed on ECMO, which is in essence an artificial lung. And Med Flight was contacted. They were going to fly me in by helicopter, but the weather kind of, as happens in New England, a blizzard started, and so the helicopter was grounded, and so I was taken in by ground ambulance. It was kind of a treacherous ride with the snow, but I got there, and they brought me up to the ICU, and spent about 11 days on life support, and then gradually I was weaned off the ventilator, and it was a very difficult time because I was aware for a lot of what was going on. I could hear people talking, the residents, house staff talking into my bed in the morning, and people talking, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't really even see because I didn't have my glasses. So really, my sensory perception was really limited to my hearing, and so I listened very acutely to what was going on. As a physician, I knew I was in very deep trouble, and it was my odds of surviving were less than 50%. Um, but I did, and was successfully weaned off the ventilator. And when I woke, they realized I was paralyzed. They had developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a unusual but well-described complication of severe viral illnesses. And so I was transferred to Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital, and I spent about 6 weeks there learning how to swallow, to use my hands, to walk, to do everything that I had previously done. It was an immensely challenging time. And there were many days where I didn't know how I was going to get through the day. But to your point, I just created little challenges for myself and tried to conquer that challenge. That was my daily goal, to get through that challenge. And little by little, I was able to rebuild myself and get strong enough to go home. And had a year or so of outpatient rehabilitation, then I was able to get back to work. And that was going well for a while until I got sick again. And had to have emergency surgery, and it was a complete setback. Recovered from that, and rebuilt my strength and my desire to get back to work. And finally, after the second year, 2015, I was back to work, and I built myself up. Went back to work full time, and but to your point, I had little challenges along the way, because it was what I was facing was just staggering if you looked at it
Right.
in its totality. So I could only go by little steps, baby steps, really. And each day I set out a task to do. And the physical therapists at Spalding Hospital were amazing. I was on the spinal cord floor. So I was with a lot of other people who were facing similar challenges. There was one other patient with Guillain-Barré who was there going through what I was going through. And we knew we were going to get better, but the people who were there with spinal cord injuries weren't. But the challenges were the same. And in my book, I try to normalize these life challenges and speak as a physician who's also a patient.
Right.
Um, and in the book that I wrote, um, it goes through the strategies that I put into play to help myself get through this. And it's it, it was a long time writing. I didn't write it immediately. I had developed a habit of journaling from high school, and I didn't keep a daily diary, but every few weeks or a month or so, I'd write down what I was thinking about, questions I had, problems I was seeing, what I thought might be solutions. And during the pandemic, we were living in Boston, and everything closed down, so couldn't work, couldn't go to the museum, couldn't go anything.
Right.
So my wife asked me to clean out a box that was there with all the papers. I found some of the journals articles that I had written down, and our son was a senior resident in medicine at Bellevue Hospital in New York, and sort of the apex of where the epicenter of where the COVID pandemic was hitting in America. And it was all in the news every night. You could read the story, heard the stories, and I realized I felt terrible that I couldn't help anybody physically. But what I could do is I could share my story of how you recover, how you get through, and how you recover from something that seems impossible to do.
So, as most, when somebody meets you and they know that you're a doctor and they hear that you went through all these illnesses and setbacks, the first thought always is, well, you're a doctor. You should know how to stay well. You should, but yet you're human and you can get sick like anybody else. And that's one of the reasons I do this show and I reach out to individuals similar to yourself, that we all can go through these same situations. But when you do, if you do what you've done and find those challenges and say, okay, I'm going to take this one step today. Because if I take this one step today, I probably can take the next step tomorrow. And that's how you got through it. But I'm sure while you were doing that, it also was frustrating to you because you know all the medical jargon, you know everything, and you know that maybe you won't be able to take that next step tomorrow. How does that play?
Excellent question. When I was intubated, I couldn't communicate, and I knew what was going on. I could hear them talking, discussing my lab tests, the blood oxygen levels, the X-ray results, and I was totally out of control. And I can tell you, it's a lot easier to be a physician than a patient. Being a patient is hard. Um, you lose complete control, which is very frustrating. Um, but there was really nothing I could do about it. And I realized that I just had to focus on what was in my control. And for the time that I was intubated, just trying to like stay sane. And there's a syndrome that happens in when people are very sick and have prolonged stays in an intensive care unit. It's called ICU syndrome or ICU psychosis, where you just kind of lose your mind temporarily. And I could feel myself like going down that rabbit hole of insanity at times because I knew what was going on, but I was powerless to do anything. So I just kept trying to sing songs in my head that I knew, recite poems that I knew, just anything that could keep my mind occupied, uh, just so that I wouldn't go into any dark spaces. I think it's a easy thing that can happen. I've seen it many times. It's very distressing for the patients and the families. Usually get over it, but it's a traumatic experience. So I tried as best I could. The only thing I had like any control of was my mind and how I thought about things. And just as Viktor Frankl said in his books, that the way you stay sane in impossible circumstances is by looking to the future. And if you dwell on the present, it's very challenging because you can't do anything about it. If you think about the past, that's not going to help either. So I just thought of future things that I would do, um, vacations we would take, um, getting back to work. And I made myself a kind of little mental checklist of the things that I wanted to do. One night, my brother was visiting me, and he was talking to me about the home that he was building, on the hook, on looking overlooking the water in Cape Cod, and you know that struck me as a great thing to try to do. So in my head, I tried to plan out my dream house, and that was it took a lot of active thinking, and it was very engaging, and it was a good strategy because it really was looking to the future. I would get very frustrated sometimes if I got the words to a song or the lyrics just didn't make any sense to me, or the poem that I was trying to remember couldn't quite get all the lines. So the active thinking of planning on how to build my dream home was really a strategy that I used that helped me greatly.
You talked about something in the beginning that when you were intubated, obviously you couldn't talk, you couldn't function. The only function you had of your senses really were your ears.
Yes.
You could hear. And I happen to wear hearing aids. And whenever I go into the hospital for anything, I always say, don't take my hearing aids out until you're ready to do surgery. And when you're finished, put them back in because I want to have a sense of where I am, not just my sight. And my husband always will laugh at me. He'll go, you don't have to hear. All you have to do is heal. And it's like, no, I need to know that I have at least that sense that I know where I am. And so I'm sure that was helpful for you because if you didn't have your hearing, you didn't have your sight because of your not having your glasses and you couldn't move your body, that would have been much, much worse for you. So at least you could sort of hear some of the conversation that was going on, even when your brother was there, which helped you think about the future as well.
Yeah. And my wife was there every day, and she would, you know, sit by the head of the bed and speak into my ear and tell me what had gone on, what the doctors had said, where things stood. And it was a very powerful thing to be treated as a sentient human being, as opposed to, just a body in a bed.
Right.
Um, And I think it's an important lesson I learned in, caring for patients that, you may not think that they're hearing, but they are. And they may not hear every word, but they need that reassurance. And hearing the soft words of my wife speaking to me, telling me what was going on, orienting me, was what kept me sane.
Well, and we heard during the pandemic that those people who were intubated, but they could bring in an iPad for them to see their family and hear their family's voices. Many of them recovered much better than others because of that connection. So, you're right. You need that human connection. You were very lucky that this didn't happen during the pandemic. Your wife could be there, your brother could be there, your kids could be there. Um, but at the same time, it had to be frustrating because you couldn't respond back to them.
It was frustrating, but I knew um, in the future, I kept hoping, looking toward the day that I was extubated and could speak. And but time, you know, lost as a dimension. Um, in the ICU, you really couldn't tell if it was day or night. You just had a very bright lights there, and so it really became disoriented as to the time and day. And so my wife would orient me every day, what time it was, what day it was, what was going on. And it really was very gratifying and essential to my emotional well-being to be able to have that connection of what was going on. It's a terrifying experience to be sick and to not know what's going on. And I learned a lot of lessons from this that made me a better physician.
Sadly, you had to go through this to learn that. But I'm sure you were a very good physician before this happened. It just made you a better physician. Um, you know, my other series, when is we talk about avoid the major special, really would reflect upon how your wife helped you because as sick as you got, it totally changed her life as well. Her partner now was ill. She didn't know how quickly you were going to recover, or at least in the beginning, if you were going to recover. She became your rock, as you said. She was the one who was there daily to let you know where the time and space was. And sometimes we forget about those individuals during illnesses or any kind of life changing situation. So, how was it when you did recover and you came back home and you were more or less equals, but here she had been a caregiver for you? Did it change much?
Um, Not a lot. I think it was very, very hard on my wife and all my family to see someone they love, you know, nearly die. And the rebuilding, I mean, it was unclear, what I would get back to, whether I would, be as independent the way I was, whether I would be able to get back to work. And it was a long ordeal. In the book that I wrote, my wife wrote the afterword, which is it's a very powerful section of the book in which she describes what it's like to be the spouse of someone who's critically ill, the emotions that you go through, what she had to do to help keep herself sane. And I think throughout the book, what we try to do is to normalize what happens when you have a critical medical illness, not only to you, but to your family. And the strategies that we use to help us navigate these, uncharted waters.
There are many of us adults who are either caring for our spouses, caring for our parents, maybe even caring for a sibling or an adult child. And there's no handbook out there that tells you how to do it. And I know when my mother got ill 8 years ago, um, we basically were told, get up to Michigan because you're probably going to get here just in time to arrange her funeral, which, we just got in the car and pressed down on the gas. As it turns out, she had another 12 weeks of life, but not the life that she ever would have wanted to have. And we didn't know what was happening day to day for her either. And I left my family behind and I went and moved in with her. And so I sort of have a feeling that I know some of the struggles that your wife went through because you're not prepared. It's there's nobody knows how to prepare you for having your loved one be ill and not knowing what the outcome is going to be. So a special kudos to her, but your strength. I know people are going to listen to this and say, oh, I don't know how Michael really did it. How did he really think about the future as he's lying in bed and he doesn't know if it's Monday, Tuesday, or Saturday? So you said that initially you tried to maybe sing songs in your head, recite poems that you remembered, but as you started to forget those words, it became frustrating for you. So when you were planning your future, besides the house that your brother was talking about, did you have any other great ideas that you were going to bring into the world for the rest of us?
Well, we were supposed to be that spring. We were supposed to be visiting our son who was teaching in France. He was teaching English as a second language in Nice, and that wasn't going to happen. So I promised myself that I would work towards getting better, and we would take that trip, and we did in 2015, and we met him in Paris. He showed us all around. He was a great tour guide, but it was, I think as I said, reference to Viktor Frankl. I think looking to the future and planning, things that have some meaning or that you want to do helped because I was powerless over the present. There was nothing that I could do. There wasn't um, anything that I could really find that was within my power, except to force myself to work with the physical therapist and to gain strength. But it was challenging beyond all comprehension to be paralyzed. Um, to have to learn how to swallow again, and to use my hands to eat, to walk. But they were very good at Spalding Hospital. They broke everything up into like 3 parts, 3 hours. It's speech and language to help with your swallowing and your speaking, physical therapy to help with your strength, and occupational therapy to help you with activities of daily living, such as bathing and getting dressed. It took a very long time to be able to get to be independent. And there were strategies that I used that I didn't know that I had. I mean, I think a lot of my upbringing had taught me resilience that I didn't know that I had. And it was I read a lot of books trying to find answers to how you get through something like I did a critical medical illness, and there's really not much. Um, there are great books on telling you how you die, like When Breath Becomes Air, but there are not a lot of books that will tell you how to navigate or give you insight on how to navigate a critical medical illness and to rebuild your body. It's different for everybody, but I found that if I made myself little goals and use those as building blocks. Angela Duckworth talks about that in her book Grit. It wasn't really about recovering from an illness. It was more about how athletes become elite athletes and how businesses recover from problems. Um, but I found that also it was applicable to anybody recovering from a critical medical illness. You first had to have a base of building blocks, little steps. And then when you achieve those, you go to the next level and you keep pushing yourself and become stronger physically and mentally with each successive row of blocks. And she talked about um, passion and perseverance. That what makes people successful is they're not only passionate about what they want it badly, but also they're willing to persevere and they're willing to listen, to take directions from their coaches or their, in my case, the therapist. And just doing something, trying to pound your body to get stronger doesn't really work. You have to listen to the coaching and the reinforcement and take the suggestions to how you make yourself better. And it was really that made a powerful impact on me. And so I used those building blocks and kept building row upon row until I got to the point where I was able to walk, to drive, and to get back to work.
It is phenomenal. A little over a year ago, I had a freaky fall. I was at the car wash and I was vacuuming out my car and I fell on my right side, but I couldn't move my left side. I was on the ground and it was like, what's going on here? I'm on my right side. Why does my left side hurt? Um, I was taken to the hospital for 4 days. Nobody knew what was going on. And basically, I couldn't move my left side, but nothing was showing up. And they finally said, we're going to send you to rehab because there's nothing we can do here. It was the two gentlemen who transferred me from the hospital to rehab that showed me the first step to moving my injured left side. So for 4 days, I laid in a hospital bed. Doctors would come in, nurses would come in, but nobody would show me what to do. But they did it in baby steps. It took us almost 40 minutes to get me out of bed. They had me doing the work. And by the time I got to rehab, I was like, now I know what I got to do. I'm going to work. And the paperwork that came through, which I saw afterwards, said that I was never going to get my left side to work ever again. I didn't know that. But almost like you, I laid in that bed and I said, okay, now I know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm going to get my left leg over to the side of the bed. And I'm going to sit on the side of the bed. That to me was the biggest challenge I could do. And 2 days later, I was using a walker. Okay.
I can totally relate.
So doctors are great. Okay. But you only have so much training in your area. Okay. And if it happens in another area of the body, they may not know exactly what it is. And we have so many different illnesses out there that it can be diagnosed incorrectly, not on purpose, but sometimes you go by what the patient is telling you or what you're seeing automatically. So how has that changed you now that you've been through this and now you're seeing patients and sometimes they're telling you things that just don't seem to add up?
Excellent question. So you're right. I think as physicians, we're trained to treat acute problems. If it's a broken arm or a broken leg, a heart attack, a stroke, there's certain protocols you go through. And but when it's something like what you had and what I had, um, it really is beyond their training, the scope of training. And it exposed me to a whole new world of medicine that I really didn't really know much about, rehabilitative medicine. And so I kind of started out like everybody. I didn't know anything about that. All I knew is I couldn't swallow, I couldn't walk, I couldn't use my hands. and I had to be taught all those things. And but the rehabilitation medicine is a very distinct type of training, totally different from acute care medicine. It's really, in the hospital, you find out what's wrong with the patient within 24, 48 hours, and then you have a treatment plan, and they get better, or and they go home, or they go to rehabilitation facility. And then you kind of lose track of it. But you're right, it is a very specialized part of medicine that I really was pretty much ignorant of. So I learned along with everybody, all the other patients, what it was like. And you had to listen attentively and listen to your own body and listen to what they have to say. I found they were very skilled at knowing what your limitations are. And they pushed me harder than I probably would have pushed myself, because I was afraid I was going to do something that would result in a setback or fall or whatever. But they were amazingly skilled at pushing people in the direction they needed to go, and really giving them hope. Um, Hope is only a four-letter word, but it carries such a powerful connotation. If you take away a person's hope, they become unmoored. They don't, their their place in life, their sense of purpose and meaning really, get shattered. And much of what rehabilitation medicine does is to rebuild you. So I learned a lot about that.
So obviously you're more attuned to that with your patients, um, in their well-being.
Yes, very much so. And it became, um, I became a better listener. One of the strategies they taught at, at Spalding was meditation, and something I'd never really done. And I learned how to meditate. Like anything, it takes a while to get really good at it. But I persevered, and I think it helped me greatly, because you learn to listen to what people are saying and not interrupt them, which happens way too often, um, and to be empathetic as opposed to sympathetic. Um, a nuanced difference, but it's a very powerful difference. I mean, if you've gone through something that the patients you're taking care of go through, you can really place yourself where they're at, because you've been there, and you listen differently.
Absolutely. So tell us the name of the book, because I know my listeners are going to want to read it, because I definitely do. And we want to put that in the show notes. So what's the name of the book and how can we find it?
The name of the book is Physician, Heal Thyself, Nearly Dead in the Journey Back to Health. It's available on Amazon, and I was told it's already a bestseller. So I think it it relates to a lot of, I think, what you and I were just talking about. People need to hear stories of recovery, need to hear stories of hope, and how you can get through what seems to be the impossible.
You are so right. Um, my father was in cardiac care most of my life, and uh, he was one of those fighters. I cannot tell you how many times we got a call that said, "Go to the emergency room. Your dad's here," and we'd get there, and my mother would tell us, he maybe has 24 hours, and next thing you know, he'd be sitting up, eating breakfast the next morning. Um, he was a very, very determined man. And I think my brothers and I got that gene in us, because like I said, when I had this fall and I tried to move myself, but I couldn't. My whole left side was so heavy. And then they told me, we're just going to lay you in a bed. It's like, but you got to figure out what to do. I can't lay here for the rest of my life. And I was the one who asked to go to rehab. It wasn't the doctors. I don't know how long they would have kept me there if I hadn't brought it up. But I knew I had to get that side moving. And I knew that somebody just had to guide me. I didn't know how to do it because every time I moved in bed, I was moving my right side. My left side just was staying on the left side of the bed. It just didn't want to go. So you're right. When people hear the stories and they realize that there are options, there are things that they can do to get better, it certainly helps. Again, Dr. Michael Hession, thank you for joining me today. Tell your wife that we are all grateful that she got you through this, because now you can share your story and you can be a more empathetic doctor. I love it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a
Bye
great
bye
day.
now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.